The bigger cop shoved his finger into the chest of the man sitting alone at the bar, pushing hard enough to slide the stool back 2 inches on the wooden floor. The man didn't flinch. He set his whiskey down with his left hand, slow and deliberate, and turned his head just enough to look the cop dead in the eyes. What happened in the next 45 minutes inside that roadside bar would become small-town legend, a story whispered about for decades by every person who was lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to be sitting in that room. Now let me set this up for you real quick. It was a Thursday night, late summer, somewhere in the mid-1990s. A little dive bar off a state highway in rural Ohio, the kind of place that smelled like spilled beer and cigarette smoke baked into the ceiling tiles. Maybe 30 people inside. A pool table in the back with a crooked rail. A jukebox that only worked if you slapped it on the left side. This wasn't a destination. This was a place you ended up. Mike Tyson was driving cross-country. No entourage that night. No security. No handlers. Just Mike, a rented car, and a long stretch of American highway. He'd pulled off because he was hungry and tired, and the bar had a neon sign that said they served food. He walked in wearing a plain black hoodie, hood down, no jewelry, nothing flashy. He sat at the far end of the bar, ordered a whiskey and a burger, and minded his own business. Here's what you need to understand. In the mid-90s, Mike Tyson was the most feared human being walking the planet. He'd destroyed fighters in seconds, knocked out grown men so fast the referee was still giving instructions when their bodies hit the canvas. His fists were registered as something beyond sport. He wasn't just a boxer, he was a force of nature compressed into 5 feet 10 inches of raw, terrifying power. But in that hoodie, sitting quiet at the end of a bar in rural Ohio, he just looked like a regular black man. And for 2 off-duty cops sitting in a booth near the door, that was enough. Their names don't matter. What matters is the type. You've seen them. Thick necks, crew cuts, the kind of guys who wore their authority even when they weren't in uniform. They had badges clipped to their belts, visible on purpose. They'd been drinking since 6 o'clock. It was now past 9. The bigger one was about 6'2", maybe 230. Red-faced, loud. The kind of loud that fills a room and dares someone to ask him to keep it down. His partner was shorter, leaner, with a sharp jaw and cold eyes that moved around the room like he was always looking for someone to correct. They noticed Mike the moment he walked in. Get this. The bar was mostly white. Rural Ohio, mid-90s. You do the math. Mike was the only black man in the room. He didn't care. He'd been the only black man in 1,000 rooms. He sat down, ordered his drink, and pulled a newspaper out of his jacket pocket. Started reading. The 2 cops watched him from their booth. The big one said something to the shorter one. The shorter one laughed. They watched some more. Mike didn't look up. His burger came. He ate slowly. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't bothering a single soul. About 20 minutes in, the big cop got up. He walked over to the bar, not to order a drink, but to stand. He positioned himself about 3 feet from Mike, leaning on the bar with one elbow, facing him, just standing there, staring. Mike kept eating. The cop cleared his throat, loud, the kind of throat clear that's designed to make you look up. Mike didn't look up. You from around here? The cop said. Mike chewed, swallowed, took a sip of whiskey. Then, without looking up from his newspaper, said no. Didn't think so, the cop said. He smiled at the bartender, who suddenly found something very interesting to do at the other end of the bar. We don't get a lot of visitors through here, especially not your kind. Now I want you to picture this. The entire bar heard that. Every single person. The pool game in the back stopped. The jukebox was between songs and the silence filled the room like concrete. A woman at a table near the window put her hand over her mouth. The bartender closed his eyes for a second, the way you do when you know something bad is about to happen and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Mike set his fork down. He folded the newspaper. He placed both hands flat on the bar, fingers spread wide, and for the first time he looked directly at the big cop. I swear this happened. The cop actually took a half step back. Something in Mike's eyes, something primal. But the alcohol pushed him forward again, and he puffed up his chest and held his ground. I asked you a question, the cop said, even though Mike had already answered it. And I gave you an answer, Mike said. His voice was calm, that famous high-pitched voice, soft and controlled. I'm not from around here. I'm just passing through, eating my food, drinking my drink, reading my paper. The shorter cop appeared now. He slid off the booth and walked over, standing just behind his partner's right shoulder. Backup position, the kind of position you learn in training. These two had done this before. You could see it in the choreography. One fronts, one flanks. They'd run this play on other people in other bars on other nights. Believe me, this wasn't their first time. You got ID? The shorter one said. Mike looked at him. You on duty? I'm always on duty. Then you should know you need probable cause to ask me that. The shorter cop's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not calm pushback, especially not from the kind of person he'd decided didn't get to push back. The big cop stepped closer. That's when he did it. He put his finger on Mike's chest and pushed. Hard. The stool scraped backward. The sound cut through the room. Listen, buddy, the big cop said, leaning in, breath heavy with beer. This is our town, our bar, and when we ask you a question, you answer it with some respect. Mike looked down at the finger on his chest. Then he looked up, and something shifted. Not anger exactly, something quieter, something worse. His shoulders dropped about half an inch. His breathing changed. The muscles in his forearms, resting on the bar, started to define themselves through his skin. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But a guy at the nearest table, a mechanic named Carl, who later told this story to anyone who would listen, said it was the most terrifying thing he'd ever seen. He said it was the way you'd watch a pit bull go still right before it lunges. No growling, no barking, just stillness. Take your finger off me, Mike said. Or what? The big cop said. Mike didn't repeat himself. He just stared. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, the big cop's finger was still on his chest. 15 seconds, the room didn't breathe. Then the shorter cop made a mistake. He reached for Mike's arm, not to arrest him. There were no handcuffs coming out. It was a grab, a dominance move, a we can put our hands on you whenever we want move. Here's what nobody tells you. Mike Tyson's reflexes in his prime were something scientists actually studied. His reaction time was measured at a level that put him in the top fraction of a percent of all human beings ever tested. His hands didn't just move fast. They moved before your brain finished telling your body what to do. The shorter cop's hand never reached Mike's arm. Mike caught it, wrapped his fingers around the cop's wrist, and held it in the air between them. He didn't squeeze. He didn't twist. He just held it there, the way you'd hold a child's hand to stop them from touching a hot stove. The shorter cop tried to pull back. He couldn't move. His face went white. Not from pain. From the realization that the man sitting on this bar stool had just stopped his movement with one hand, without effort. The big cop stepped forward, chest out, and grabbed Mike's shoulder. Mike stood up, and that changed everything. See, when Mike Tyson was sitting on a bar stool in a hoodie, he looked like a regular guy. But when he stood up, the hoodie stretched across a neck that was thicker than most men's thighs. His traps rose up behind his ears. His chest filled the fabric until it looked like it was painted on. He wasn't tall. He didn't need to be. He was wide. He was dense. He was built the way a safe is built, compact, heavy, and impossible to move. The big cop's hand was still on his shoulder. Mike looked at it. Then he looked at the big cop. The height difference didn't matter. The cop had to look into Mike's eyes, and whatever he saw in there made his grip loosen. I'm going to tell you something, Mike said. And I'm only going to say it once. He reached up with his free hand and pulled the hood of his sweatshirt down, revealing the full shape of his head, the tattoo on his face, the unmistakable profile that had been on every magazine cover, every pay-per-view poster, every sports page in America for the last decade. Trust me on this. The recognition didn't come all at once. It came in waves. The big cop saw the face first. His mouth opened slightly. Then the tattoo registered. Then the neck. Then the whole picture assembled itself in his alcohol-fogged brain, and his hand dropped off Mike's shoulder like he'd touched a live wire. The shorter cop, whose wrist Mike was still holding, looked at his partner's face, then looked at Mike, and you could see the exact moment his soul left his body. The bartender, who had been frozen at the far end of the bar, later said he heard the shorter cop whisper 2 words under his breath. Just 2 words, and those 2 words were, "Oh, God." Mike released the shorter cop's wrist. He didn't shove him. He just opened his hand and let it go. The cop pulled his arm back and held his own wrist with his other hand, rubbing it. Not because it hurt, because he needed to hold on to something. Now you know who I am, Mike said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. And I know who you are. You're 2 guys with badges who think that means you can put your hands on anyone you want. You walked over here because of what I look like, not because of anything I did. The big cop opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I've fought men who trained their whole lives to hurt me, Mike said. He took 1 step closer to the big cop, just 1 step. The cop didn't step back this time, but only because his legs wouldn't cooperate. 63 men stepped into a ring with me. You know how many walked out the same way they walked in? None. Not one. Now listen, The room was frozen. Every person in that bar was a statue. The pool player in the back was holding his cue stick in mid-stroke. The woman by the window had tears running down her face and she wasn't even wiping them. Carl the mechanic had his beer halfway to his lips and it stayed there for a full minute. The big cop finally found some words. "Look, we didn't know. You were just what?" Mike said. "Being friendly, checking on me, making sure I was safe?" He shook his head. "Don't insult me." He sat back down on his stool. Let that sink in. He sat back down. He didn't storm out. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't call anyone. He sat back down, pulled his plate closer, and picked up his fork. The two cops stood there. The big one looked at the shorter one. The shorter one was still holding his own wrist. Neither of them knew what to do. Their whole playbook was designed for people who were scared of them. They had no page for this, no protocol, no training. "You can leave now," Mike said, not looking up. They didn't move. Mike took a bite of his burger, chewed, swallowed, took a sip of whiskey. Then he turned his head just slightly and said, "That wasn't a suggestion." And this is where it gets real. The big cop's face crumbled. Not in anger, in shame. The alcohol was burning off fast now, replaced by something cold and sober. His partner grabbed his arm and pulled. They walked back to their booth. They didn't sit down. They grabbed their jackets, threw cash on the table, and headed for the door. But before they got there, Mike spoke one more time. "Hey." They stopped, didn't turn around. "You ever put your hands on someone like that again, badge or no badge, you better hope they're not me." The door closed behind them. The bar stayed silent for 10 full seconds. Then the bartender exhaled, and it was the loudest sound in the room. Carl set his beer down. The pool player finally took his shot and scratched. The woman by the window wiped her face with a napkin. And then something happened that Carl the mechanic says he'll never forget as long as he lives. A man at a table in the middle of the room, an older guy, maybe 60, wearing a John Deere cap and flannel shirt, stood up slowly. He walked over to the bar and sat down on the stool next to Mike. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there. Then he raised his hand to the bartender and said, "Give this man another whiskey, on me." Mike looked at him. "I've lived in this town my whole life," the old man said, "and I've watched those two pull that nonsense for 20 years. Nobody ever said a word. Nobody ever stood up." He paused. "You didn't even throw a punch, and that's the most powerful thing I've ever seen a man do. Here's what gets me every time. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, the man who bit off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear, the man who told opponents he would eat their children, looked at this old farmer in a John Deere cap, and his eyes got glassy. He blinked twice. He pressed his lips together and nodded. "Thank you," Mike said quietly. "Just that, nothing more." The old man patted him on the shoulder, gently the way you'd pat a friend, and went back to his table. Mike finished his burger. He finished his whiskey. He finished the second whiskey the old man bought him. He left a $100 bill on the bar, on a tab that couldn't have been more than $20, and he walked out into the night. Carl the mechanic says he went to the window and watched Mike get into his car. He sat there in the parking lot for a minute before starting the engine. Just sat there. Then the headlights came on and the car pulled onto the highway and disappeared. No punches thrown, no arrests, no lawsuits, no headlines. Just a man with two of the most destructive fists ever created, choosing not to use them. And two men with badges learning, for the first time in their careers, what real power actually looked like. Now, if you made it this far, I need you to do something. Hit subscribe. Because stories like this one, stories that never made the news, stories that lived in dive bars and mechanic shops and got passed down over beers, those are the stories we tell on this channel. And you don't want to miss the next one. The cops never came back to that bar. Carl says the owner put up a framed photo of Mike Tyson behind the register about a week later. Someone had taken a blurry picture from across the room that night, just the back of Mike's head and his shoulders, sitting at the bar, reading his newspaper. The owner wrote underneath it in black marker, "He was here, he was kind, don't start nothing." That photo stayed on that wall for over 15 years. New bartenders would ask about it, regulars would tell the story, and every single time they'd get to the same part. The part where Mike Tyson caught a cop's wrist in midair without even looking, and the person hearing it for the first time would get the same look on their face. The same look those two cops had when they realized the quiet man in the hoodie was the most dangerous person they would ever meet. And the most dangerous thing about him? He didn't need to prove it.